There's a moment in dating where intuition starts whispering before facts ever speak. You feel a shift, subtle, almost invisible, but something in her energy, her behavior, or the way she interacts just feels different. Now, here's the truth. Attraction and connection aren't just about what's said, they're about what's revealed without words. When someone has shared an intimate experience elsewhere, it often leaves behind clues, not because they're trying to hide it, but because human behavior always leaks the truth. And if you know what to look for, those signals become impossible to ignore. There's something deeply telling about emotional detachment, and it rarely shows up in loud, obvious ways. It's subtle, quiet, almost like a slow fading of something that once felt natural and effortless. You'll notice it not in what she says, but in what's missing. The warmth that used to be there, the curiosity, the way she leaned into conversations, it all feels slightly reduced, like the volume has been turned down on her presence. When a woman is emotionally connected to you, there's a kind of ease in how she shows up. She's engaged, she's responsive, and there's a sense that she wants to be there with you, in that moment. But when emotional detachment sets in, that desire begins to slip. She might still reply to your messages, still meet you, still go through the motions, but it feels different. Her attention feels divided, like part of her is elsewhere, even when she's sitting right in front of you. You might catch it in the way she listens. Before, she was tuned in, reacting, asking questions, building on what you said. Now, her responses feel shorter, less invested. There's a lack of depth, a lack of that emotional pull that made interactions feel alive. It's not that she's being rude or dismissive, it's that she's no longer fully present, and presence is something you can't fake for long. Another way this detachment shows up is in her energy toward you. Attraction and emotional connection create a certain kind of magnetism, an unspoken draw that brings two people closer. When that connection weakens, the magnetism fades. You may find that she's less enthusiastic about making plans, less excited when you do meet, or quicker to end conversations. It's not dramatic, but it's noticeable if you're paying attention. What makes this challenging is that she might not even be consciously aware of the shift herself. Emotional detachment isn't always a deliberate act. It can be the result of her attention, feelings, or energy being invested somewhere else. And when that happens, it naturally creates distance, even if she hasn't fully processed why. You might also notice a change in how she responds to emotional moments. Things that once created closeness, sharing something personal, having a deeper conversation, no longer land the same way. She might avoid going deeper, keep things light, or subtly steer away from anything that requires emotional vulnerability. That's because detachment often comes with a need to protect distance. And here's the key thing to understand. Emotional detachment isn't about one isolated moment. It's about a pattern. Anyone can have an off day, be distracted, or seem distant occasionally. But when it becomes consistent, when the warmth doesn't return, when the connection feels like it's slowly slipping away, that's when it means something. The mistake many people make is trying to chase that lost connection, to overcompensate, to win back the energy that used to be there. But the truth is, you can't force someone to be emotionally present with you. You can only recognize when they're not. And when you do recognize it, the most powerful thing you can do isn't to question her endlessly or ignore your instincts. It's to step back and observe. Because emotional detachment always tells a story. And if you're willing to pay attention, it will show you exactly where you stand. Overcompensation is one of the most confusing signals because, on the surface, it can look like a good thing. Suddenly, she's more affectionate, more attentive, more eager to please. She might text you more often, compliment you more, or go out of her way to show care and interest. And if you're not paying close attention, you might interpret this as her becoming more invested. But something about it feels slightly off, like it's too much, too sudden, or not entirely natural. When someone is genuinely connected to you, their affection flows effortlessly. It builds over time and feels consistent with who they've been all along. Overcompensation, on the other hand, often feels like a spike, a noticeable shift that doesn't quite match the previous rhythm of your connection. It's not the presence of affection that stands out, it's the intensity and timing of it. What's really happening underneath is internal conflict. When a woman has experienced something that creates emotional tension, whether it's guilt, confusion, or even just divided feelings, there's often a subconscious urge to restore balance. And one way that shows up is by giving more attention, more kindness, more reassurance. It's almost like she's trying to convince both you and herself that everything is still okay. You might notice this in how quickly she responds to you, especially if that wasn't her pattern before, or in how she suddenly becomes very agreeable, avoiding any kind of disagreement or friction. She might laugh more at your jokes, validate you more, or seem unusually eager to keep things smooth and positive. But instead of feeling deeply connecting, it can feel slightly performative, like she's trying to maintain an image rather than simply being in the moment. Another subtle sign is inconsistency beneath the surface. Even though she's showing more affection, it doesn't always feel grounded. One moment, she's incredibly warm and engaged, and the next, there's a slight drop in energy, a hesitation, a distraction, a moment where she seems to pull back. That contrast is what reveals the truth. Genuine emotion tends to be steady, while overcompensation often comes in waves. It's also important to notice how this behavior aligns with her emotional presence. Overcompensation focuses on actions, what she does, what she says, but emotional presence is about how she feels when she's with you. If she's doing all the right things but you still feel a lack of depth or connection, that's your intuition picking up on the difference between real engagement and an attempt to cover something up. What makes this dynamic tricky is that it can pull you in. When someone gives you more attention and affection, it naturally draws you closer. You might start investing more, opening up more, or feeling reassured. But if that affection is coming from a place of imbalance rather than genuine connection, it won't sustain itself. Eventually, the effort becomes harder to maintain and the cracks begin to show. The key here isn't to reject affection or become suspicious of every positive gesture. It's to stay aware of the context and the consistency. Ask yourself, does this feel like a natural progression, or does it feel like a sudden shift? Does her energy feel grounded and present, or slightly forced and uneven? Because overcompensation isn't really about you, it's about what's happening inside her. And when you understand that, you stop being swept up by the surface and start seeing the deeper pattern for what it is. A shift in communication patterns is one of the clearest signs something has changed, because communication is where emotional presence shows up most consistently. When a woman is genuinely engaged with you, there's a natural rhythm to how you talk. Messages flow, conversations build, and there's a sense of ease in how you connect. But when that rhythm changes, even slightly, it creates a feeling you can't ignore. Sometimes the change is obvious. She takes longer to reply, goes quiet for periods that didn't exist before, or becomes inconsistent in how she shows up. But what really matters isn't just the timing, it's the quality of the communication. Because even if she's still replying, something about those replies feels different. Shorter, less expressive, less curious about you. You'll notice that conversations that once had depth now stay on the surface. Where she used to ask follow-up questions, now she simply responds. Where there was once playfulness or emotional warmth, now there's neutrality. It's not that she's being cold, it's that she's no longer investing the same level of energy into the interaction. And communication at its core is energy exchange. Another subtle shift is unpredictability. Before, you could almost anticipate how she'd respond or engage because there was consistency in her behavior. Now, it feels uneven. One day she's responsive and engaged, the next day she's distant or distracted. That inconsistency creates confusion. And confusion is often a sign that her attention is no longer fully aligned with you. You might also notice that she starts avoiding certain types of conversations. Anything that requires emotional depth, vulnerability, or clarity about where things stand may be brushed aside or redirected. She may keep things light, casual, or even slightly vague. It's not necessarily because she wants to deceive you. It's because deeper conversations require a level of emotional presence she may not be fully able or willing to give in that moment. There's also a shift in initiation. When someone is invested, they don't just respond, they reach out. They share things, they check in, they create opportunities to connect. If that initiation starts to fade or becomes noticeably less frequent, it's a strong indicator that her focus has shifted. And while she may still engage when you initiate, the dynamic becomes one-sided, which slowly drains the connection. Another important detail is how she communicates when plans or expectations are involved. If she starts being more vague, less decisive, or less enthusiastic about committing to time together, that reflects a deeper shift in priority. Communication isn't just about words, it's about intention. And when intention weakens, communication follows. What makes this sign so powerful is that it doesn't rely on assumptions. It's based on observable patterns. You're not guessing how she feels, you're noticing how she shows up. And when those patterns change consistently, it tells you something real is happening beneath the surface. The mistake many people make is trying to rationalize these changes. They tell themselves she's just busy, distracted, or going through something. And while that can be true occasionally, consistent changes in communication are rarely random. They're a reflection of where her attention and emotional energy are going. The key is to stay grounded in what you're experiencing, not overreacting, but also not ignoring it, because communication is one of the purest indicators of connection. And when it shifts, it's not by accident. Defensive or evasive behavior doesn't usually arrive in an obvious confrontational way. It's subtle at first. It shows up in small moments, how she answers a simple question, how quickly her tone shifts, or how she redirects the conversation just when it starts getting a little too real. And what makes this sign so important is that it's less about what she says and more about how she protects what she doesn't want revealed. When someone is open and emotionally aligned with you, there's a natural ease in communication. Questions don't feel like threats, and answers don't require careful construction. But when there's something internal she's managing, whether it's guilt, confusion, or divided attention, her responses begin to carry a certain tension. You might ask something completely reasonable, and instead of a straightforward answer, you get hesitation, vagueness, or a slightly defensive tone. One of the first things you'll notice is over-explaining. Instead of giving a simple, direct response, she adds extra details that weren't necessary. It can feel like she's trying to make her answer more convincing, even though you didn't challenge it in the first place. That's often a sign she's not just answering the question, she's managing how the answer is perceived. On the other side of that, you may also see the opposite, avoidance. She might give short, closed-off replies or quickly change the subject. Conversations that could naturally go deeper are cut short or redirected to something lighter. It's not that she can't engage, it's that she's choosing not to stay in that space for too long. And that choice usually comes from wanting to avoid discomfort or exposure. Another key detail is how her emotional reactions shift. A simple question that would normally be neutral suddenly feels like it triggers irritation or defensiveness. She might say things like, "Why are you asking that?" or "You're overthinking." These responses aren't just about the question, they're about creating distance from it. By pushing back, she regains a sense of control over the situation. You may also notice inconsistency in her answers over time. Small details don't quite line up, or her explanations change slightly depending on the moment. It's not always obvious, but it creates a subtle sense that something isn't fully stable. And that inconsistency isn't necessarily intentional. It often comes from trying to keep track of what's been said while also managing internal tension. What's important to understand is that defensiveness and evasion are protective behaviors. They're not random. They show up when someone feels like there's something at stake, something they don't want to confront directly. And instead of addressing it openly, they unconsciously create barriers in communication. The challenge for you is not to get pulled into the reaction. When someone becomes defensive, it's easy to either push harder or back off completely, but both responses can take you further away from clarity. Pushing can escalate tension, while backing off completely can leave you ignoring what you're clearly sensing. The real power comes from observing the pattern, noticing how often it happens, what triggers it, and how consistent it is. Because one defensive moment doesn't mean much, but repeated patterns of evasion and defensiveness tell a very clear story. And when you see that pattern clearly, you don't need to force answers out of her. Her behavior has already given you the insight. You just have to be willing to recognize it. A shift in physical boundaries or comfort is one of those signals that speaks loudly without saying a word. Physical behavior is deeply tied to emotional state, and when that state changes, the body often reflects it before the mind even catches up. What makes this sign so revealing is that it's not just about whether she's more or less affectionate, it's about how natural or unnatural that affection feels compared to before. When a woman is emotionally connected to you, physical closeness tends to feel effortless. There's a natural flow to how she touches you, how close she sits, how she responds to your presence. It's not calculated, it's instinctive. But when something shifts internally, that instinct can change. You might notice she pulls back slightly, even in small ways. Maybe she sits a little farther away, doesn't initiate touch as often, or her responses to your affection feel delayed or less enthusiastic. What's important here is not to focus on one isolated moment, but on the pattern. Everyone has off days where they're less affectionate or more reserved. But when that slight distance becomes consistent, it starts to reflect something deeper. It's as if there's an invisible boundary that wasn't there before, a subtle hesitation that interrupts the natural flow of connection. Interestingly, the opposite can also happen. Instead of pulling away, she may become more physically open than usual. At first, this might seem like a positive shift. More touch, more closeness, more intimacy. But again, the key is how it feels. If that increase in physical affection doesn't match her emotional presence, it can feel disconnected, almost like she's going through the motions rather than being fully in it. This is where intuition becomes incredibly important. Physical behavior carries energy, and you can often feel whether that energy is genuine or not. When someone is truly present, their touch feels intentional, grounded, and connected. When they're not, there can be a slight emptiness to it, something that feels just a little off, even if you can't immediately explain why. You might also notice changes in how she reacts to your touch. Where she once leaned in, now she might hesitate. Where there was once comfort, there may now be a subtle stiffness or lack of responsiveness. These are small details, but they add up. Because physical comfort isn't something that usually decreases without a reason. It reflects what's happening emotionally beneath the surface. Another layer to this is timing. If these changes happen suddenly, without a clear external reason, it becomes more significant. Gradual changes can happen naturally as dynamics evolve, but sudden shifts often point to something internal that has altered her state. And since physical behavior is one of the most instinctive forms of expression, it often reveals that shift very quickly. The mistake many people make is either ignoring these changes or overanalyzing them in isolation. But the truth lies in observing the consistency and the context. Does her physical behavior align with her emotional presence? Does it feel natural, or does it feel slightly forced or disconnected? Because when someone's internal world changes, their physical behavior almost always follows. And if you're paying attention not just to what she does, but how it feels, you'll start to see the pattern clearly. An energy mismatch is often the strongest signal of all because it's the hardest thing to fake and the easiest thing to feel. You can overlook words, you can rationalize behavior, but energy, how someone feels around you, cuts through all of that. And when a woman's energy no longer aligns with her words or actions, it creates a quiet but undeniable tension in the connection. On the surface, everything might seem fine. She's still talking to you, still showing up, still saying the right things, but something doesn't land the same way anymore. The spark feels dimmer, the connection feels thinner. It's like the emotional charge between you has dropped, even if nothing obvious has been said or done to explain it. When someone is fully present with you, there's a kind of alignment. You feel it in the way they look at you, in their tone, in their body language. There's a coherence between what they say and how they feel. But when that alignment breaks, you start to notice small contradictions. She might say she's happy to see you, but her energy feels flat. She might tell you everything is okay, but her presence feels distant or distracted. This mismatch often shows up as a lack of presence. She may be physically there, but mentally and emotionally, she seems elsewhere. You might catch her zoning out, losing focus in conversations, or responding in ways that feel automatic rather than engaged. It's not that she's being intentionally dismissive, it's that her attention is divided, and you can feel that split. Another aspect of this is enthusiasm. Genuine connection brings a natural excitement, even in simple interactions. There's a lightness, a playfulness, a sense of enjoyment in being around each other. When that fades, interactions can start to feel routine or even slightly forced. The laughter isn't as spontaneous, the conversations don't flow as easily, and there's a subtle effort required to maintain what once felt effortless. What makes energy mismatch so powerful is that it often contradicts logic. You might find yourself thinking, she says everything is fine, so why does it feel like something's wrong? That internal conflict is your intuition trying to process the difference between her words and her emotional state. And intuition, in these moments, is usually picking up on something real. You may also notice that your own energy starts to shift in response. You might feel more uncertain, more cautious, or more aware of how she's reacting. That's because energy is reciprocal. When hers becomes inconsistent, it naturally affects yours. And suddenly, instead of feeling relaxed and connected, you feel like you're trying to read between the lines. It's important to understand that energy mismatch isn't about one bad interaction or an off day. Everyone can be tired, distracted, or not fully present sometimes. But when this feeling becomes consistent, when the disconnect doesn't resolve itself over time, it starts to reflect a deeper change in how she's showing up in the connection. The mistake is ignoring that feeling because you can't prove it. People often look for concrete evidence before trusting their instincts, but energy doesn't work that way. It's subtle, but it's incredibly honest. It tells you not just what someone is doing, but where they truly are emotionally. And when you start paying attention to that, when you stop focusing only on words and begin to notice alignment, you gain a level of clarity that most people miss. Because at the end of the day, someone's energy will always reveal what their words are trying to hold together.